We can begin by just taking a nice deep breath, knowing that wherever we are in the country or in the world, the Holy Spirit is connecting all of us tonight. And let us pray. Loving God, our hearts are restless until they rest in you. At a time when there is great need for peace, justice, and equity in our world, help us to know that it is through you and only you that we may find the courage and the strength to be your church. Open our hearts tonight to hear the words and the witness of our brother Daryl as we join him in answering the call of the common good. And we ask this and all things in your name. Amen. All right, so I have the honor and the joy of introducing Daryl this evening, or morning for our friend in India on the call. So Daryl Grigsby is an author and commentator on contemporary Catholic issues. A retired public works director, he also holds a master's degree in Theology and Pastoral Studies from Seattle University and is a graduate of the Sabbatical Renewal Program at the Jesuit School of Theology of Santa Clara University. He's a board member for Leadership Foundations, which resolves critical urban challenges around the world, and for FutureChurch. Grigsby is the author of In Their Footsteps, Inspirational Reflections on Black History for Every Day of the Year, and is a frequent contributor to National Catholic Reporter and Black Catholic Messenger. And to add on just a personal note, Daryl is also a really kind and compassionate man. After any program, he is the first person to send an email of encouragement and gratitude. So I'm so grateful to learn from him this evening. So without further ado, take it away, Daryl.
Well, thank you, Martha. And can you guys hear me okay? I'm good. Okay. Well, thank you, Martha and Russ and Olivia and all the Future Church folks, and for all of you who joined tonight. So I'm very excited about this because I love my book. And the reason that I love my book, which came out in December, and I worked on it for 3 years prior. To be totally honest, the reason that I wrote my book was to figure out why in the world I'm still a Catholic. Because it is, as you all know and can appreciate, it is often so difficult to be Catholic, particularly for me anyway, in the last year, when you see how the majority of Catholics, to be honest, have voted in some of the positions the bishops take, and then our teachings around women and LGBTQ and about racial justice, it has been rather difficult. So that's why I wrote the book, and and here's how it came about. Is I mean, I seriously was pondering, why am I still in the Catholic Church? Though there are many things I love about it. But I started to realize that many people that I sat next to in the pews in these parishes that I have been in my lifetime, when you end up talking to them in their own quiet way, they're doing works without a lot of fanfare. I can cite one example. When I was in San Luis Obispo, I went to St. Patrick's in Oro Grande, and I sat next to an older couple who, if you were to look at them, you would say, well, these guys are probably, you know, doing good just to make mass, and and it's good to see them. They're friendly people. But I started talking to them one day, and they were both Maryknoll missionaries who had just come back from the border from their work. I mean, and they were like, I think, older than I am. And I said, "Oh my goodness!" And then I went to the mission at San Luis Obispo, and after mass, I'm walking to my car, and I'm talking to this guy who's always quiet. And I said, "Oh, what are you going to do this week?" And then he humbly said he was going to be going to the prison to carry on his prison ministry. And then then it just dawned on me, there's so many people who, um, out of their faith commitment, have worked for justice and the common good, and they don't worry about getting caught up in all the negative things that can often sidetrack us about the church. And so that's that's why I wrote the book, and then um, and then I thought through. I mean, I'm a Catholic convert of 26 years, and one advantage of being a convert, I have to say, especially as an adult, like I was at 44 years old, is that you can basically approach and learn from a lot of the things that are often taken for granted. So, for example, I had no idea about the whole body of Catholic social teaching. So once I started reading those documents, I was amazed at how powerful they were. And so in the introduction, where I kind of discuss um, what are the key components of Catholics who've committed themselves to work for the common good, I found that there were three things. And one is the communion of saints, another is Catholic social teaching, and the third is the Eucharist. Um, and in a way, the book um, is intended to show the communion of saints of which we are a part. So I'll just back up a bit. So the book has covers 36 contemporary Catholics who only two of them I interviewed. The rest I did research on in books and articles and other means, and then also talking with people that knew them. So the 36 individuals that I selected were people who I thought were relatively contemporaries of our time. So I didn't go back to the medieval Europe or anything. I wanted to have the people that I covered to be somewhat contemporary. So um, in the introduction, I talk about the communion of saints as a key motivator and Catholic social teaching, and also the Eucharist. Uh, and I was struck by, in some of the articles that I read, some of the people that I covered, in particular, um, Sister Simone Campbell and Sister Teresa Harpin, there in the first chapter. They're not the only ones, but they spoke in interviews about how the Eucharist was transformative for them. And one of the things that I point out in the introduction is that we make such a big deal about the bread and wine becoming the body of Christ when really the power of that sacrament is that, according to Ron Rothheiser, we the people are being transubstantiated into the body of Christ. And so when Jesus says, "You're going to do greater things than I've done," um, that really is because we collectively are the body of Christ, and where Jesus came down in the form of one human person, we are all over, as evidenced by this call, and able to do more than Jesus did by us becoming the body of Christ in the world. And so I felt like, um, it was just so important to tell these stories because, I mean, I'm telling you, as I read through uh, and did research on all of the people that I covered, it was fairly incredible and inspiring. And I do have to say, I did answer the question for myself about why I'm still Catholic, because I even go back often and look at some of the reread some of the things that I wrote. And really, to me, the power in the book is not so much what I wrote, but is the life and witness of the people that I covered. Um, and the subtitle, which I'm very proud of, the subtitle of the book is An Eternal Offering. And I have to say, during COVID, um, when I was watching Mass online, to be honest, I was able to listen more to the Eucharistic prayer than when I was in person. And I really heard the words in Eucharistic prayer 3, Lord, make of us an eternal offering to you. And so that to me is what these people symbolized and epitomized by their commitments, because they have, through their commitment to Catholic social teaching and being inspired by the saints and being fueled by the Eucharist, they have made of their life an offering to God through their service to others. Um, and I also, so among the 36, a couple of things that I really wanted to accomplish too was of the 36, 19 of the um, 19 of my reflections are about women, since it's my opinion that, without women in the church, there would be no Catholic Church. And oftentimes the contributions I feel are overlooked. And it was intriguing to me, and not just in having the number of women be a little more than the men, but also just the references to the influence of women in the lives of the people. For example, in the essay that I have on Diana Hayes, a Black Catholic theologian, she talks about the wisdom of her mother from South Carolina through all the suffering and discrimination she suffered, uh, how she still imparted a wisdom that she passed on to her family. And in my essay about the short one about Father Augustus Tolton, the first recognized African American priest in the United States, the reason he escaped from slavery was because his mother rowed them across the Mississippi River while they were being fired upon by slave catchers. Uh, and then I read something about Hans Kuhn, Father Hans Kuhn, that somebody made a quote saying that he's the way he is because of those 5 sisters of his. I mean, I don't know anything about who his sisters are, but clearly they had an influence on the way that he carried on his ministry. And then the other thing that was important to me, being African American myself, and feeling like Black Catholic history is often understated, as well as other people of color, I really wanted to cover a wide diversity of people, since the church, to me, the church's strength is its global nature. Um, and Revelation 7:9 talks about John seeing a great multitude of people that no one could count from every nation, language, and tongue. And I feel oftentimes when you read books about Catholic saints or individuals, I don't feel we capture the depth and breadth of diversity in the Catholic Church. And so it was important to me to have that kind of diversity. So there in the book, there's African Americans and people from Brazil and the Philippines and Burundi, El Salvador, France, India, and Mexico. And it was also important to me, the thing that's also exciting about this is just the breadth of vocations that um, the people are involved in. So, for example, Mary Lou Williams, who's in the book, is a jazz musician, and Father Mveng from the Cameroon is in visual art. In the world of medicine is Paul Farmer and Lena Edwards. Sister Norma Pimentel works at the border. Sister Teresa Harpin's in prison. Daniel Berrigan and Bishop Gumbleton work on peace. Sister Laura Manso works with the indigenous in Brazil, and then M. Sean Copeland and others are involved in racial justice issues. So the whole idea was to show the vast array of areas where Catholics are involved. So the other thing that's kind of exciting to me is, oh, by the way, when I started the book, I did have 52 people, but I had to cut some people out because Paula said people don't read as much as you think they do. So I had to cut out 16, which was very sad. First, I had to cut out 10, and then they said it's still too long. I had to cut 6 more, which was really brutal. I actually don't think about that anymore because they were all written, and I'm going to do something with them at some point. But so here's to me what I love about the book is that I have 4 chapters. Chapter 1 is consecrated religious women. And chapter 2 is lay women and lay men. Chapter 3 is priests, and chapter 4 is bishops and cardinals. And I really wanted to have all 4 of those vocations shown because, according to the documents in Vatican II, they all have a unique and important vocation. And so that's why I actually start each chapter of them with language from the Vatican II documents. So, for example, in part 1 about consecrated women, according to the decree on the adaptation and renewal of religious life, it says, I'm quoting from that document, all religious, therefore, with undiminished faith, with charity toward God and their neighbor, with love for the cross and hope for future glory, to spread the good news of Christ throughout the whole world. And so then the women that I didn't have in that chapter, to me, illuminate that calling. There are 12 people in that chapter, and I just wanted to. What I was going to do is quickly go through just one person from each of the 4, just as an example of how what kind of people they are. And I have to say, it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to decide who I'm going to talk about because they're all so fascinating. I see in the chat, the name of the book is Catholics for the Common Good, an Eternal Offering. Plus my cover, I mean, come on. Paulus designed that cover. I mean, I really feel the cover is profound. I love it because it has such an abstract meaning that some people say it looks like the communion of saints. Who knows? But I say whatever the Spirit is telling you it means, that's what it is. But in chapter 1, I wanted to just talk about Sister Patricia Gray, who actually I learned about in Shannon D. Williams' book, Subversive Habits, about the history of African American sisters. And she was, in 1968, she was a member in the religious Sisters of Mercy in Pittsburgh, one of the first African American members. And in 1968, when Dr. King was assassinated, and then there was all the other, regressions in the civil rights movement, that's when they had the first National Black Catholic Clergy Caucus, also in Pittsburgh. And she went to this event as a nun, although she was not a priest, obviously. And when she and an African American lay man was there and a white priest was there, the priest voted to see who if they could actually stay and be part of the first Black priest gathering. So they had a vote, and the vote said that the Black laymen could stay, but the white priest and Patricia Gray had to go. But Patricia Gray didn't go. She stayed there. And in fact, she argued with the priest, saying that there's more Black religious than there are Black priests, and there would be more power in a joint meeting than the priest meeting separate and the religious sisters meeting separate. And even though she was about 25 years old, she stood up in the midst of 60 priests to argue her case. And one of the quotes she said is, she says, I got up and suggested they open the caucus to sisters and allow us to participate fully. I pointed out there are too few Catholic priests. For this reason, the Black priests ought to combine forces with us, and our power will begin to be heard. Well, it caused quite a stir. I challenged them openly on the matter and accused them of prejudice against their own women. And even though they still held firm to their position. She, with encouragement of a couple other priests, decided she was going to start the first Black Sisters Conference. And so she sent out over 600 letters to religious organizations, to religious orders all over America and in the Caribbean and in Africa, and got 200 responses. Most of them were that you don't need to have a separate Black meeting because that's separation. But still, she persisted and had the first National Black Sisters Conference, and 155 people gathered at Mount Mercy College in Pittsburgh. And that conference still exists today and creates, a forum for the Black sisters to gather and basically for nurture and to enhance their ministry. And if you look on their in their website, their material talks about their as Black religious women, they see themselves as gifted with the choices of God's blessing. And it talks about the gift of our womanhood, the channel through which the Son of God himself chose to come into the human race, endows us with these qualities which are designed for the deliverance of humanity. So that's her, that's Sister Patricia Gray. She went by the name of, and she was in the order Sister M. Martin de Porres. And after she left the order, she went and got a PhD and was a professor for many years. The next chapter, chapter 2, about lay men and lay women, I can relate to since I'm a lay person myself, and since most Catholics are, and since even people who are ordained started out as a lay person. I just feel that there's a lot of power behind the gifts of the laity. And so the quote that I have to start that chapter is from Lumen Gentium 33. All the laity then have the exalted duty of working for the ever greater extension of the divine plan of salvation to all people in every time and place. I mean, that I think is a calling that, particularly in this time, is really significant. And so the person that I just wanted to talk about briefly was in this chapter. Again, it's hard to decide who, but Marguerite Barankitse from Burundi. I just was astonished by her story. She was in Burundi in 1993 when they had the president was killed in a coup, and he was because he was kind of a Marxist. He was trying to bring together the country based on class rather than the race, the Hutu and Tutsi designations. And so, that didn't, trying to bring people together didn't fit well with some of the plans that people who exploit divisions have. And so, they had a coup, and then there was massacres of whoever was in the minority between the Tutsis and the Hutu. And this was in Burundi in 1993. Anyway, she herself was Tutsi, but she was in a majority Hutu area, and she had adopted 7 children, and when she was trying to find shelter for her children, she was captured and forced to watch the massacre of like 70 people. But because she was of the same tribe as the people who were doing the killing, they let her go along with her children. But she went from there and founded the Maison Shalom, the House of Peace, and that organization started on land donated by the Catholic bishop. She started a school and a home and a health clinic, and provided counseling for people who had suffered trauma. And so the children and the orphans and the wounded came there. And there were hundreds of people who were part of that ministry, And in fact, she said sometimes they brought together children with adults who had killed the children's parents, just to create and and a scene of forgiveness and peace in the midst of all that turmoil. And then a few years later, she got herself in trouble with the Burundi government by criticizing their policies toward the poor. And so she was forced to leave and go to Rwanda. And when she went to Rwanda, she founded the same kind of an organization that she had in Burundi called the Oasis of Peace. Um, and I just wanted to read a little bit of what she said. And again, um, it's just so inspiring to see, because these are not, I mean, these are flesh and blood Catholics and human beings who have overcome themselves trauma and difficulty, and yet persisted in having love and mercy being their um, overarching work. In both places, both in Burundi and in Rwanda, they really focused on programs to help women who often suffered the most trauma. And so, one of the things that she said, in addition to the work they were doing, um, these are her words. She said that, this is in an interview that she gave, that women are candles in the darkness. Despite the challenges they live with, they stay strong. Women also don't need to be taught much about peace. They instinctively understand the purpose of reconciliation, even after facing the worst atrocities. If you want to destroy the world, then you must destroy women, and nobody can do that. No matter how hard they try, we keep bouncing back and rising stronger than ever before. Um, I mean, that's just, and again, when you look at what she dealt with and what she saw, to continue on with that kind of commitment, again, based on her faith, I just thought was a story that must be told. And, just as an aside, the barrage of bad news about the Catholic Church is just unbelievable. Um, so when you read things like this, it's just like refreshing. It's like a breath of fresh air and a reminder, like, okay, I'm not crazy for still being in the Catholic Church. Um, so in the third chapter, chapter 3, about priests, and I've met some awesome priests in my day. I've also encountered some that were less than that, but that's true for all categories of human beings. But the Vatican II documents, the decree on the ministry and life of priests, look at what this says. Priests will be helped by cultivating those qualities which are rightly held in high esteem in human relations. Qualities such as goodness of heart, sincerity, strength, and constancy of mind, careful attention to justice, courtesy, and others. That is what our church says our priests should be all about. And the person that I wanted to talk about was Father Rutilio Grande, Jesuit in El Salvador. Um, and I read a book by Thomas Kelly called When the Gospel Grows Feet that talks about his whole ministry. And this book, just like Shannon Williams' book about Black nuns, blew my mind just about the commitment that he made. And so, he was born in the El Salvadoran village and raised by his grandmother. And while other kids were out playing, he played church in the house and set up an altar and pretended he was a priest. And even though he himself had mental health problems that he had to deal with in terms of nervous breakdowns and others, human condition, he continued in his vocation as a priest. And then Kelly's book just talks about the influences on his understanding of his priesthood calling. One being the Latin American Bishops' Conference in Medellin, and another being Popular and Progressio, Pope Paul VI letter about the integral development of the human person. And so his first assignment was to teach at a Jesuit university in El Salvador, and then his second assignment was pastor in a local church, and he became frustrated at how it was difficult for him to one second. It was difficult for him to reconcile Catholic inattention to social equity and his own concern for the poor. And then he went to the Pastoral Institute for Latin America in Ecuador, which is a place where they brought priests and lay people together to talk about how to build a community of activists in your parish or social organization. And so he went through that course and came back to his parish and created what he called in the town of Aguilares the Grand Missionary Tour. And in that missionary tour, this is just like the same liberation theology and based community model, but they trained local people to be able to empower themselves to deal with the challenges of poverty and government repression and other issues that they had. And so, so in addition to training people to be leaders, they also had a separate category called delegates of the word, which is not unusual for that kind of ministry. But the delegates of the word were to be leaders, and they were selected by the community, and they also picked. They had to go through additional training. But the delegates, this was fascinating. So the delegates were confirmed before the whole community on Pentecost Sunday after going through additional training. And here's what the delegates committed to in their public proclamation. Our only politics are to be faithful proclaimers of the gospel, which has to do with all human activities aligned with God in order to transform the world. We will denounce with energy and without pretense all sorts of injustice and abuse against the human person, wherever they come from. Our goal is to build together with you a community of brothers and sisters committed to build a new world without oppressors and oppressed, according to the plan of God. And so they trained a total of 231 delegates of the word who made that public commitment. But of course, the more the community became empowered and the delegates of the word got involved in union activities and land reform and education and literacy for the poor, the more that attracted the attention of the government and the right-wing militias. And so before one of his last homilies, Father Rutilio Grande said this: many people prefer a Christ of undertakers and morticians. They want a mute Christ without a mouth who pass by them walking in the streets. Many prefer a Christ with a muzzle on his mouth. Many prefer Christ made for our own whims and according to our own interests. This is not the Christ of the Gospels who gave his life for the noblest cause of humanity. So shortly after that homily, on March the 12th, Father Rutilio was driving back through one of the towns, and there was a pickup truck behind him. And as they came up to a creek, there on both sides of the creek, there were gunmen on both sides and gunmen in the back. And he was assassinated along with a 15-year-old and a 72-year-old male. And after he was assassinated, they say hundreds of people came to his memorial. And of course, many people know that what transformed Oscar Romero, the bishop, from being a moderate to a more progressive one was what he heard about the murder of Rutilio Grande. And then the last one I'll cover briefly, and this is in the bishop category, and bishops and cardinals are in the last chapter. And what we say about the bishops in our decree on the pastoral office of bishops in the church These are not my words, this is the church's words. Bishops should present Christ's teachings in a manner relevant to the needs of the times, providing a response to those difficulties and problems which people find especially distressing and burdensome. That is what our bishops should do. And so the bishop that I had in this category that I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to say this because it impacted, I would say this is a direct reason why I'm a Catholic, is Bishop Raymond Hunthausen, who was bishop in Seattle. And he was actually there before I was there, but his legacy remained when I became a Catholic. And so when Bishop Hunthausen was known for his openness toward LGBTQ ministry and for being outspoken about marches for peace. And in fact, he withheld his income tax to the proportion of the amount that went to nuclear weapons. And he was known throughout the region for his stand for peace and also for his just openness to people who are not Catholic and racial justice issues, etc. And he says in the book about him that he was influenced. He had just been made bishop, and he went to Vatican II at age 41. And he said Vatican II turned his whole head around about what his role as a bishop should be. And so when he came back both to Helena, Montana, and then to Seattle later, he was trying to live out the calling of a bishop in terms of just being a pastor. And the reason that I say that I feel I'm a Catholic because of what his legacy was is because the parish that I attended and became a Catholic at was St. Therese Parish, which was pastored by Patty Repikoff, who was a pastoral life director. And so at that church, when I went there, there was a gospel choir, and there was a woman pastoral life director, and then they had African American Jesuits and white Jesuits from Seattle University do the Eucharist, and there were people who were openly gay in the church, and it was just, I mean, it was to me the image of what the Catholic Church could, and should be, and so much of that was because of the kind of tone that was set by Bishop Hunthausen, and he described himself. And of course, if you're too progressive, you will be investigated depending on what area you are in. So they had a whole visitation and investigation of what he was doing and saying, to the point where they even appointed an auxiliary bishop to follow him around. And what it was said about him compared to his auxiliary bishop, one of the people who worked in the diocese said the auxiliary bishop was happy to see things inside and outside the box. But they said with Hunthausen, he never saw a box at all because everything was far more open. And so, Hunthausen, when he left Vatican II, said, I've come to see myself as someone invited to be a leader, invited to join a struggle to be faithful to the gospel. And it's also interesting, the last thing I'll say about this is that there were some priest abuse issues that had come up during his time as bishop, which he had turned over to the King County prosecutor. And I just find it shameful that at the same time Hunthausen was being investigated for being a man of peace and openness, at the same time that investigation is going on, we are allowing this priest abuse crisis, which has resulted in the closure in parishes, in dioceses going bankrupt, and the closure of schools in inner cities, and all kind of, not to mention the human cost of that. And so, what a shame it is. So we're spending money investigating Bishop Hunthausen and having a blind eye to the abuse. I mean, it's like completely and totally maddening. So those are the four I wanted to cover, and I just wanted to mention a couple things that were significant that I learned in the book and reading this. two things. One thing I really wanted to, one reason I read some of the quotes of the people is I really wanted to let the people speak for themselves about what they were all about. And if you want to know a funny story, when I was writing this book in the beginning, I thought I was going to have to self-publish it because I didn't think it would be picked up. And so I wasn't that careful with tracking my quotes because I said, well, I'm a self-publisher, who cares? But then when Paulus said they wanted to publish it, I went back and I saw that I didn't have, I hadn't, I had noted every place that I got quotes from for like 150 pages. So I had to go back. I'm just saying this so nobody ever does this. So I had to go back and then try to find where I got these quotes from, which probably took me another 4 months. Some of them I never found, so I had to cut them out. In other cases, I found better ones, but that just shows some short-sightedness on my part. But I wanted to have the quotes and the footnotes. There's several pages of footnotes, so you could find where the quotes are from. But I really wanted the people to speak for themselves. And then the other thing that was significant that I felt was how, even though I cover individuals, there's 36 individuals, in all cases, they're part of a community. And they were either influenced by someone else or they influenced someone. Examples of that is, Monica Hellwig and Paul Farmer, who are in the book. They were both influenced by Gustavo Gutierrez, and Oscar Romero was influenced by Rutilio Grande. And it was just significant how much the communion of saints played in their ministry. And then the last thing I'll just say is that one of the people that I covered, Sister Laura Manso, who works in Brazil among the indigenous. I also met her when I went to Rome as part of the Discerning Deacons delegation, which was a huge privilege, and where FutureChurch was also. But in the piece about her, the Catholic community that she's a part of, one of the things they said is that the people who they work with don't even know they're nuns, but all they know is that they feel good when we're around. And so I just wanted to leave with that. That's what the good news ought to be, and that's what being a Catholic ought to be. Is that that's what good news is? That when you're around somewhere, there's no condemnation, there's no intolerance, there's no indifference, but there's an outpouring of service and love. And so that's what the people in the book do. And I'm open for any questions and or comments. And Russ, I did go longer than I said I would, man. I realize that.
That's absolutely okay. I'm glad that you did. Take all the time you want, Daryl. Thank you very much for that presentation. It was really great to hear about, sort of your personal story about why you wrote this book, because I think a lot of us struggle with that question from time to time. It seems like a cyclical, wow, that was really hard for me to say, a cyclical question that comes around every now and again. And it's always good to hear how other people grapple with that question of, why we stay in the church, why we stay Catholic. And then it was really great to hear about the four people. We are going to open things up for you to be able to interact with Daryl, make a comment, ask a question. The only thing that I ask is that you use the little reaction button down at the bottom of your screen. If you hit react, and then you can click the button that says raise your hand. That way I will know who to call on in order. And then the only thing you'll need to do is unmute yourself, and I'll bring you up on the screen with Daryl. And while folks are getting their questions formulated in their minds, Daryl, I was thinking about this book and what's going on in the world and in our country right now in the United States. And I wondered if there are any witnesses that you find yourself returning to in these days for inspiration or encouragement or strength that sort of help you get through? I mean, obviously you've pointed out these four in particular, but are there any who you particularly find yourself returning to right now?
Well, that's a good question, Russ. I appreciate it. And I will start out by saying in the introduction, I talk about these 36 are just a representation of a whole lot more people. And what I know about many of the people whose names and faces I see on this call, I know a lot of people are doing the kind of work that the book talks about. And so, to be honest, just being around Catholics like that is inspiring. And but I would, to answer your question, you know, it's I'd say it depends on the day. I mean, I pick the book up and read about something, and it's just so inspiring. So the other day, for example, I read about Daniel Berrigan and the work that they did for peace. Um, but also, I didn't I referred to this in the book, but he wrote a small book about the book of Revelation called The Nightmare of God. And in it, he talks about our country and how instead of learning from our mistakes, we go from forget to forget instead of remember to remember and then change our ways. And it was just to me so um, accurate about what we're doing today in terms of our forgetfulness about the consequences of the amount of hate, vitriol, and indifference that we're going through right now on such a large level. Uh, but he also says in the same book, quoting Revelation, he says, we tend to focus on the negative and all the trauma, but we forget what Jesus says in the book of Revelation in chapter 1, I think it's 18, where Jesus says, I am alive forevermore. And through that life and our commitment to that life, no matter what is happening around us, that is a true fact. And that's what fueled his work and the work of Plowshares and his brother and other people like that. But
Got it.
tomorrow I might have a different answer. I'll read somebody. Tomorrow I'll have a different answer.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. All right, let's see. Mary, let's get you up on the screen here. Mary Gills, you have a question.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful to hear. And it truly spoke to me because I've been asking myself that question about staying Catholic for a while, and read, Brian McLaren's book on Do I Stay Christian? Do you know what I mean? But so one of my questions was, because I'm still staying Catholic and still singing in the choir and showing up and sometimes having to meditate through the homilies. But so I wonder, so when I think about maybe I should be Episcopal, or maybe I should be, do you know what I mean? And I wonder if they could write a similar book.
I think they could. And I actually go to Episcopal churches from time to time. Mm-hmm. And I think I even say in the introduction that even though this book is about Catholics, there are other faith traditions that could write something like this. No question. My only thing is, to me, the difference in our beloved Catholic Church is that, to me, it's a teeny bit more global and has such a rich history. And our documents, which we ignore, but the social teachings are just so powerful. And I can't stress this enough. Oh my goodness, the Eucharist should be transformative. I mean, it just is. I mean, as a sacrament of self-giving and a symbol of selfless love, that should be what makes our church so much different. If we really are into the real presence, which to me is the real presence in terms of us. So, but yeah, you're totally right. I think other traditions could write this, and I think we ought to. I mean, because Christianity in general is like, It's like a big, come on, people. I mean, here's another crazy thing. If you look at polls and surveys, like Pew Research and others do this in the book White Too Long by the Southern Baptist guy, the more people go to church or mass, the less racially tolerant they are. And so the less you go to church, the more you are into racial justice. I mean, is that insane or what? It's like embarrassing. And since you asked the question, I'm sure you have this. I feel like when I tell people I'm Catholic, I have to like explain it. Like what kind of Catholic? I'm not this and I'm not that. Like I can see people look at me like, what? Anyway, but to answer your question, I think other traditions could and should, and I do think the Catholic, because of our teachings and our global nature, and I just feel like our story could be compelling.
Thank you very much.
Stay Catholic.
I'll try. I'm trying really hard.
I feel you. I get it. Trust me, I get
But I
it.
talked to my parish priest. He said, and talked to him about some of these things. He said, well, you're not a very good Catholic, are you?
That's it. That means you're a good one.
I said, I guess God's the only one I care about, whether he thinks.
Yeah, no. You're
There
good.
you
Thank
go,
you.
Mary. Great question. Thank you, Mary. And I see Dorothy, you have your hand up. So give me a moment here and I'll get you up on the screen. And Dorothy, you'll just need to unmute and go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, thank you. And thank you very much, Daryl, and everyone who's here, really. I'm, of course, when you said you had to eliminate 16, I immediately thought, who are those 16 that you had to eliminate? But I wondered, these last week, Josephine Bakita and Dorothy Stang were both celebrated, and so I was just very curious about whether they were included, and might you just tell us a few that you had to eliminate, who you wanted
Yes.
to be a part?
Yes. Well, that's a good question. Now this is going to be hard because I've tried not to think about it because it was painful. But I had a beautiful thing about Sandra Snyder's, about her insights on the Gospel of John, and I had a thing about Raymond Brown, same kind of thing, and Elizabeth Johnson, and people like that. This woman whose escapes my mind, a theologian in Seattle who wrote a lot on the Trinity, and she died of cancer. I'm forgetting her name now, but she was one. Oh, and then I had also interviewed. I had interviewed one of the women priests who was ordained in the Danube that I had to reluctantly cut out, and I also had interviewed the gentleman who is the director of Seattle Catholic Community Services, because it was really unbelievable the amount of work that they had done in Seattle and Western Washington, to the point where, like other Catholic charities and Catholic Community Services, I mean, they were the second largest social service agency after the state of Washington. And so, I just felt like all the good, this is what was driving me crazy, is all the good that the church does through these people gets neglected because of all the bad news. And it was Catherine Lacuna, which was a great one. I was really sad. Catherine Lacuna was because I had heard her speak, and oh man. Anyway, I'm going to do something with that, with the rest of them. I might do it like a Substack or another book. I don't know.
Well, I'm glad. Thank you for doing all that research, and appreciate all that you're sharing with us. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.
Great question, Dorothy. Thanks for asking. All right, and Vincy, let me bring you up on screen here.
Yeah. Hello, Daryl. I
Hey,
really,
hey.
I really enjoyed your talk, inspiring. What I was touched with, one thing was you said about the Eucharist. It should transform us, and I think that has touched me. By the way, Daryl, I'm a Jesuit priest, so yeah, I felt a little connected with you also, as you have done something with the Jesuits. And
Yes.
second thing, I believe that this book will be the stories which you have shared can be used as inspiration for today's people, for today's youth and laity, which I can use in my sermons. Yeah, thank you.
I'd be honored. I'd be honored. Thank you. That was the whole point. I just felt like, and I think I also put in the introduction, there should just be more about the people like this because there's so many people like that, including, like I say, people on this call who are doing, you know, bringing the light of Christ in places all over the world every single day.
Thank you.
Great, that's a great idea, Vincy, to lift these people up in your homilies. That's a really good idea. I love that.
I'd be honored.
You
I
know,
can say I'm quoted in India. I'll say I'm quoted in India.
international rock star, Daryl Grigsby. It's interesting because as Vincy was talking, I was thinking about my work with Catholic Women Preach. And one of the things that I do is Betty Ann finds all these people, these amazing women, and then I get to be the one to be in conversation with them about their videos and get everything online. And I am stunned by the biographies because we ask for a brief biography of every one that we post. And I'm always stunned by the amazing work that people are doing. And probably most Catholics just don't know anything about them and don't know who they are, but they do their thing and they're making such a huge difference in the world. And as you say, Daryl, really being the real presence of Christ in our world today. And there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of people like that out there.
And Catholic
All right.
Women Preach helps me stay Catholic. I'll tell you that. And those homilies are always better than what I hear. I'll just say, always.
Yeah. Speaking of Catholic Women Preach, my colleague Betty Ann would like to ask a question, so let me bring her up.
Daryl, it's so marvelous to be with you, and I hope that we see you at the LA Religious Education Conference. Will you be there?
Oh, yes, I will.
Oh, come
Definitely,
to our booth.
definitely.
Russ and
Yep.
I booth, but just listening to you, I feel like I'm just strolling down memory lane because so many of these people you mentioned have been part of my history as well. Monica Hellwig was my first professor at Georgetown, the Introduction to Catholicism, Catholic Theology, which she was so profound and a very generous single mom of 3 adopted children. Monica was amazing. Roy Hunthausen, when I was a Maryknoll lay missioner in Peru, my superior, Pete Byrne, was best friends with Hunthausen from their days in Montana. I could go on and on and on. And as you know, we've had a lot of these women on Catholic Women Preach. I just want to commend you for the format of this book because we are in really dire times indeed. And to combat the tendency to make the person the other, the vermin, the venom, the just telling stories. I was on a call with our Congresswoman Catherine Clark, who's number 2 in Democratic leadership after Hakeem Jeffries. She said, "We need you to tell us the stories of how people will be impacted by some of Trump's policies." So I just want to commend to everybody on the call to be resilient, to just keep going and tell these stories. And that's what you're doing, to tell the stories of people who can inspire us. So I just wanted to thank you.
Well, thank you. Much appreciated.
Thanks, BA, Betty Ann.
I mean, I will just say I just can't tell you how inspiring it was. Because some of these people that I knew, but even the ones that I knew about, as I got into it, there was always more depth to their faith commitment, to their prayer life, references to their, how important prayer was to them, and their community and their Catholic faith. And again, not being bogged down by all the reasons why, all the legitimate reasons why we can be bogged down, but just focusing on their calling.
That's great. And I think a terrific place to end. I don't see any more hands up. So thank you so much, Daryl, for writing this book, for sharing it with us, and for everything you are and all that you do. You're just you could be in this book, Daryl. So, but that would be a little self-serving. So maybe someone else will write the book about you.